UConn went on a 30-0 run against the number 2 offense in the country, sending Illinois home and looking like an unstoppable force on their way to a second straight Final Four.
Locked On Podcast Network presents the 2024 NCAA Bracket Breakdown. Presented by Nissan.
What is up, folks? Welcome into a live postcast episode of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part, of course, of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade over there. You are joining us at the best place to get your college basketball content every single day. Want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners. Also, shout out to Amazon Music. You can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. Go check it out. They have a Times Square billboard with our Locked On College Basketball logo on it. We are thrilled and honored to get a chance to see that. Definitely want to give them a shout out. Also want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Nissan. Folks, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be just around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. All right, Isaac, we are recapping Saturday's action. Yukon back to the Final Four. Alabama into the Final Four for the first time in program history. We're going to talk about those two games, talk a bit about that matchup, and also get you ready for some of those matchups coming our way on Sunday as well. But let's start with this UConn-Illinois game. Isaac, somebody to challenge UConn, and it hasn't happened at all. In fact, this stat is absolutely mind-blowing to me. UConn has led every game they've played in this NCAA tournament by 30 points at one point. They won some of the games by 30-plus points, but in this game, they only won by 25 points against the number 10 ranked team in the country, a 3 seed who won the Big Ten tournament, and the number 2 ranked offense in the country. UConn held them to 52 points. Isaac, Illinois went a 50-plus, I think it was like 52, 53 real-time minutes without scoring a single point. It was a absolute masterclass from this UConn team defensively. It was beautiful what they were able to do offensively, particularly early in the game and early in the second half when they went on that huge, massive run to just completely blow this thing open. And Isaac, you look at the box score, you watch the game, you see both teams had the same numbers from the free throw line. Illinois was actually much better from the three-point line, but down on the block, the Huskies just completely took Illinois completely out of this game. It was a absolutely dominating performance from a team that has looked completely dominant in the last 2 NCAA tournaments.
And Andy, where I want to go first is like we had so much conversation about both of these offenses and how elite they both are. And one of the things you said yesterday on last night's show was, hey, look, but let's not forget, UConn's defense is right there too. Meanwhile, Illinois, has crept inside the top 100, but they're still in the 80s. And that's the thing for me is, sure, fine. Like UConn and Illinois, now UConn, and we'll get it against Alabama, elite offenses. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't matter because this UConn defense is going to shut you down. And I think people get so wrapped up on the other side of the court that they forget just what they can do. Illinois previously this year, their lowest scoring game, Andy, was 64 points. And then this happens.
Yeah.
There were only 3 other times all season they had been under 70. And then this, it's bonkers to think about that, to be this level of balanced at this high a level, it just doesn't matter what you have. You're not going to be able to do it. Let's talk about how that affected an individual performer. Terrence Shannon Jr. is one of the most elite, unstoppable offensive forces in the nation this year. Andy, do you agree?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
Great. So coming into this game, Andy, we just assumed because we were asking the question, Terrence Shannon Jr., Marcus Damask, who's the third musketeer to join him? Is it Quincy Guerrier? What do we expect? We went way too far in our assumptions, Andy, because Damask got his. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Shannon's out here with just 8 points on 2 of 12 shooting, 0 of 1 from 3. And Andy, even of those 8 points, 6 of them came after Illinois was already down by 30. So really, he got 2 points when it mattered. UConn defense, elite. Good luck to you, Crimson Tide.
Well, I think that's a great way to think about it, because you look at Alabama relies a lot on the 3-point line. And I think that could help them a little bit in the sense that perhaps they won't be as impacted by Donovan Clingan, because what happened in this game for Illinois was the driving lanes were just completely shut off from them. Coleman Hawkins was a complete non-factor in this game, frankly, on both ends of the floor. He was 2 of 10, 5 points total for him, 4 boards, just 3 personal fouls, just really didn't contribute to this team. And Shannon couldn't get into the lane. He couldn't get some of those acrobatic lay-ins. He wasn't able to draw contact. He only had 6 free throw attempts. He made 4 of them. That's half the points that he had in this game. He only took 1 3-pointer, and that kind of stands out to me. This is a guy who averaged about 7 3-point attempts per game, shot 36% from 3. So to not even be, trying to make an effort there was kind of odd to me. Damask was 2 of 3 from 3. The whole rest of the team was 4 of 20. Like, there was no 3-point barrage from Illinois. They didn't bring it there. I think they kept trying to go into the paint, and they weren't able to score from 3, but they weren't able to score around the rim either because of Donovan Clingan. He finished this game with 5 blocks. He had 22 points and 10 rebounds. This is perhaps the most dominant performance, especially on a big stage, that we have seen from Clingan, and he did it immediately. I think he had the first 7 or 8 points for UConn, something like that. There was a stretch where Clingan started the game, went to the bench, came back in the game, and played for a few minutes. And at that point, Illinois had not scored a single point while Donovan Clingan was on the floor. Like, he was legitimately that impactful for UConn in this game. We'll get more. We got a whole week's worth of shows where we're going to get into the Alabama-UConn matchup and what that might look like. But Alabama's going to have to knock down those threes, because trying to score in the paint against this UConn team is a strategy that is very clearly not working.
And Andy, with it, I don't understand why Illinois thought, hey guys, you know what's a good idea? Let's keep trying to go at Donovan Clingan, because maybe we'll get around him this time or he'll foul us. And Andy, it just wasn't working. And then, at halftime, I wrote in our notes like, hey, maybe Illinois will try something different, but here they go again, same old thing. And it just made 0 sense to me. But Andy, who I thought was quietly hugely impactful in this game was Cam Spencer.
Yeah.
Only, 11 points, which isn't otherworldly or mind-blowing, but it was efficient. 4 of 9 from the field, 1 of 3 from 3, 2 of 2 from the free throw line. Career high, 12 rebounds for Cam Spencer. How about that? 5 assists, 0 turnovers, 2 blocks, and a steal. And Andy, I think one of the debates that I've started hearing more and more about is last year UConn better or this year UConn better? And it's just so different, because you think about somebody like Andre Jackson, and what he brought was this, obviously not a good shooter by any stretch of the imagination, but brought so many other intangibles. But so does Cam, plus the offense. And so I think when you start having that conversation, that's a big factor in that debate.
Yeah. And when you're debating it, you can't just think of like Clingan is the same or Caravan is the same, because those guys have improved. They have gotten better from the versions of themselves that they were last year. So this team is playing as good or better than last year's team. I mean, they beat everybody by 13 plus points last year, but I don't think they had 30-point leads in all of their first handful of NCAA tournament games. So this team is just absolutely cruising right now, and hard to imagine that they get slowed down. And Illinois, shout out to them for the great season that they had, for putting together an offense that was one of the top 5 in the country, at the finishes top 2 in the country. But they just, they lived and died in a lot of ways by Shannon, and certainly they were able to play well without him at points in the season when he was not available, and Damask really stepped up. But in this game, when Damask needed that help, it just didn't show up. And you see a handful of guys who are ending their careers here for Illinois. It's always tough to see. That's part of the deal in the NCAA tournament. But man, you never want to get blown out. And it seems like it's a recipe that you're going to face when you play this UConn team, because they are not holding anything back so far in this tournament. And
Andy, I had to laugh at myself in this game, because UConn got off to that 9-0 start, and it was like 7-0. For Donovan, it was like Donovan Clingan 7, Illinois 0. And so they get going, And I was like, oh man, that's super impressive from UConn. 9-0 run to start this game. And then I had to just go back and laugh at myself for that take because of the Illinois did a great job battling back to get it tied at 23, Andy. And then it was just over. One of the more ridiculous runs we have ever seen in this context, in this environment, with these two types of teams to do. And of course, Illinois was missing some open shots. Let's say that. But still, Andy, absolute dominance from this team. That can we read, Andy, the scoring margins of UConn's last 10 NCAA tournament games? Let's go back, and I'll just start at the first round of last year. Plus 24, plus 15, plus 23, plus 28, plus 13 in the Final Four, plus 17 in the national championship game. And you already said they've been up at some point by 30 in all 4 games this year, but the final margins have been 39, 17, 30, and 25. Andy, in that 10-game stretch, UConn has won by an average of 23.1 points. There has been nothing ever like this. Folks, legitimately, we are watching history happen in real time. Please stop and appreciate it for what it is. But Andy, after UConn's dominance, we still had another game to go in the Elite Eight to set the left half of the Final Four. And Mark Sears, despite a very quiet as a mouse start to the game, ended up leading the Crimson Tide to their first ever Final Four a year after Alabama had the top freshman and was the number 1 overall seed. How'd they do it? We'll talk about that in just a second. Hey, right after I tell you that this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that really stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. And Andy, it's the perfect team to use because we got Locked On Wolfpack in the chat right now. Shouts to the Wolfpack ahead of their matchup with Duke tomorrow night. The NC State Wolfpack are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. This team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance in beating Marquette on Friday evening to continue their miraculous postseason run. They are now one step away from their first Final Four since 1983, just 41 short years ago. And all that stands in their way is ACC rival Duke. They say win life, go Rogue. And that's exactly what the Wolfpack have done. So take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, Andy, let's move to the nightcap in the West region where we had unexpectedly a 4-seed Alabama versus 6-seed Clemson. Whoever won this game, it was going to be their first ever trip to the promised land of college basketball, the Final Four. And Andy, despite another, by the way, we should say, hot start from Clemson, Alabama steals themselves, starts hitting from the outside as they always seem to do, and wind up winning 89-82. And no, this was not the football national championship. Nate Oates and the Crimson Tide are rolling on, as we just said, a year after they were the number 1 overall seed. They make up for it, as Purdue's trying to do right now on the other side of the bracket. Andy, how did this happen?
Mark Sears. That's how this happened. I mean, just an extraordinary second half from Mark Sears. It wasn't just him. We have seen a couple of players here for Alabama have dominant second halves. Grant Nelson did it against North Carolina. Huge second half from him. Mark Sears did it tonight. We also saw Jaron Stevenson have a career night for him, 19 points, 5 of 8 from 3, career high in points, career high in three-pointers made for Stevenson. It feels like oftentimes when we're talking about teams making runs to the Final Four, making runs to the national championship, particularly when they are teams that are not expected to be there. Alabama's a 4 seed. It's not like it's shocking necessarily that they're here, but I don't think a lot of people expected it. And when you get there, it's usually because somebody stepped up. We saw that with Clemson throughout this tournament with Chase Hunter. Unfortunately, wasn't able to get it done here, but Stevenson had this career night. But like we said, Isaac, ultimately, this was Mark Sears' show. He was 0 of 7 in the first 14 minutes of this game. He was 0 of 4 from 3. Didn't even score his first points, so there was 4 minutes left in the first half of this game. But he ends up finishing with 23. He finishes in the second half 8 of 11 from the field, 7 of 10 from 3 in the second half of this game. Just absolutely red hot from Mark Sears. Hit multiple threes in the final few minutes that really helped put this game on ice for the Crimson Tide. It was a masterclass offensively from Nate Oates' team. They had 54 points in the second half. It was not a masterclass from Nate Oates' team defensively, as they allowed Clemson to score 50 in the second half. But ultimately, as they have done throughout this tournament, they did enough to secure a victory. They move on to their first ever Final Four, sets up a very intriguing matchup with those UConn Huskies.
And Andy, as we well know, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you're out here doing what UConn's doing, or if you win 6 games by 1 point, you're still the national champion. So, like, good on Alabama. They just keep rolling right along. Andy, there were 3 things that I think really stood out to us as you and I were kind of talking about this game. And I want to start with the Clemson free throw line, which I thought was, if I'm a Tiger, the thing I'm bemoaning the most. And this is, as we've talked about multiple times in recent days, like with Caleb Love going cold, with RJ Davis going cold, right? Things that you've relied on all season at some of these teams that have fallen. In this one for Clemson, the Tigers come into this game, Andy, catch this, 10th in the nation in free throw percentage, 78.7% as a team. Tonight, this is almost painful for me to say, they shot just 8 of 16 at the free throw line. In the second half, Andy, only 3 of 11. It's just the second time this season they were under 60% at the free throw line. That is absolute brutality, Andy, and they're going to be thinking about that for a long time. The worst offenders of it were Ian Shefflin, who was 4 of 8, PJ Hall, who, as we've talked about, ultimately fouled out, and Clark, who unfortunately missed those 2 free throws at a critical moment in the final minutes of the game.
Yeah, that was really, really tough to watch for a team that's so good typically from the free throw line, to not only not be knocking them down throughout the game, but to not knock them down in clutch situations. At the end there, Clark gets that steal, gets fouled by Mark Sears. It was one of the few mistakes that Nick Pringle made, by the way. We shouted out Sears and Stevenson, but Nick Pringle had 16 and 11. He was 4 of 6 from the field, 8 of 13 from the free throw line, had a trio of assists and a block as well. Really nice game from him, but he inexplicably threw the ball away on a miscommunication to Mark Sears in the final minute. Clark gets the steal, gets fouled immediately by Sears. There's some momentum. There's some frustration. Sears and Pringle are kind of yelling at each other. It feels like this is kind of a situation where they could kind of swing some momentum back in their way. And Clark, who I don't know his exact percentage off the top of my head, but I think just like the rest of that team was very good typically this season, and he misses both of them. Alabama gets the rebound, and that was the moment where you could just feel that the game was officially over. Like that was what completely sealed it. It was already probably over even if Clark made both of them, but that really cemented it. They had a chance, that killed it, and it was just like, it's so deflating to have an entire game go by where you just can never find any ability to knock down those free throws.
Yeah. Andy, he's 83.3% this season. And honestly, here's the thing though. Had he made those, they're down 3 and it was 37 seconds left. You don't even have to foul there. You get a stop. Like you just play out the possession and hope you can get a stop. I mean, honestly, it's like that, the back-breaking was really like, I thought once PJ Hall went out, Clemson was just done.
Yeah.
Man, they still found resolve and kept pushing back, got it to as little as 3. And then Alabama just kept pushing. Andy, a couple other things where it went. We talked about Mark Sears finally finding his way in totality at the 3-point line. Bama, 16 of 36. Andy, obviously it's, not like a setting the world on fire kind of percentage for Alabama, but it is 44%, right? Like it's like, okay, we'll absolutely take that. Meanwhile, Clemson is 8 of 26, so a lower percentage, fewer taken, and Bama just out here doing what Bama does from an offensive standpoint. Another critical stat. And then the third one, Andy, and Brad Brownell actually talked about this. You and I were watching his comments in the back hallway after the game. He talked about the rebounding and how critical it was. Overall, Alabama led the rebounding by plus 11, 44-33. But Andy, it was the first half where Alabama had really set themselves apart, specifically offensive rebounding and second chance points. Interestingly, at halftime, both teams had 15 defensive rebounds. It's like, all right, way to go. You're sticking together. But Alabama led the offensive rebound 13-5 And even more importantly, they converted that into 10 second chance points while Clemson was sitting on a goose egg. Clemson made it a closer battle in those areas in the second half, but Bama had already established too much of an offensive rebounding and second chance points lead that Clemson was never able to catch up and make that even.
Last thing I'll say on this game before we move on and kind of get ready for that UConn-Bama game and talk about the matchups we got on Sunday is Alabama did this without Latrell Wrightsell as well. And I think that's an important detail. Wrightsell is one of their better players throughout the season, valuable scoring guard, somewhat similar to Estrada and Sears as these transfers who come in as high-level scoring guards from their previous schools and have some success. So we'll see if Wrightsell is able to play against UConn. I think that's a big advantage for Alabama, of course, if he is able to do so as a guy who is a big contributor. But shout out to the Crimson Tide for not only making it to the Final Four and beating two very good teams, but to do it against North Carolina and Clemson here without Latrell Wrightsell is incredibly impressive. Isaac, we're going to talk what are these key matchups between this UConn-Alabama game, and we're going to get into them briefly tonight, but we got a whole week where we're going to talk a lot more about this matchup and tomorrow's matchup, which we're going to give you a little bit of preview for, as well as some transfer portal news. All of that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you that today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, say goodbye to busting brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, player props. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Right now, Purdue, they have cruised through this NCAA tournament, not quite as much as UConn, but they haven't had a lot of close games, and yet they are only 3.5-point favorites against Tennessee. Feels like a bit of a low line to me. If you are in agreement, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, Isaac, we got UConn, Alabama as the first matchup officially of the 2024 NCAA Tournament Final Four. Really want to kind of talk about what we think the key matchups are going to be here in this UConn-Alabama game, because we've talked a lot about Donovan Clingan and the impact that he has on this team in the front court. Alabama does more of their scoring from the three-point line. Could that potentially neutralize Clingan's impact defensively? I think that's kind of the first thing that really stands out to me. So it's kind of a Clingan versus Grant Nelson matchup or Clingan versus Pringle matchup. But I think realistically, if you're just talking like the most fun, intriguing matchup of this game, it's the matchup between Tristan Newton and Mark Sears, two transfer guards in their second year with their programs, electric scorers, do-it-all versatile guards, like two of the best point guards in the country, quite frankly. So whether it's Clingan in the front court, whether it's Sears and Newton in the back court, there's a lot of intrigue just personnel-wise between these two teams.
Yeah, Andy, so, I mean, like, here's the question that immediately comes to my brain. How many threes does Alabama have to hit to beat UConn? Gut reaction.
They hit 16, right, in this game.
That's right.
They only won by 7.
That's right.
And they're playing a better offensive team.
That's right. And a better defensive team, by the way.
I think if they hit less than 15, there's very, very little chance that they win. And that sounds crazy to say, because if Alabama hits 14 threes, you'd think, well, I mean, unless it's 14 of 40, which, I mean, could be the case, frankly. But if they make 14, 15 threes, they're going to need to have played some of their best defense. And they're just not that good of a defensive team. And so to me, at 15 feels like the money line for them, where they're going to need to be in that range, if not higher, in order to get a victory. And I think they're going to take a whole bunch of them, because Nate Oates is smart enough to know maybe what Brad Brownell was unwilling to eventually, or excuse me, what Brad Underwood was unwilling to admit of, like, hey, continuing to drive into Donovan Clingan is just not working. I suspect Alabama's not going to do that, but we'll see.
Well, I wanted to answer this for myself before I looked something specific up, and so I did. The number I had in my head was 20, which is absurd and ridiculous, but legitimately, they've got to do something ridiculous to knock off UConn, I think, right?
Yeah.
So I went back and looked at when they played Purdue, Alabama and Purdue in a neutral site game. Alabama took 46 threes in that game, Andy, made 19 of them, and still lost 92-86. And so that's why I'm just like, even in a game where they just go absolutely nuclear in terms of making threes, I still just don't think it's enough.
Yeah.
And that's in a game where they played the game's other most dominant big man in Zach Edey. That's what they're facing in Donovan Clingan. But with all due respect to Purdue, with a better cast around Donovan Clingan than what Zach Edey has around him. And so I just look at this and it's like, all right, fine, neutralize Donovan Clingan. What's Alex Caravan going to do? What's Cam Spencer going to do? What's Tristan Newton going to do? I mean, it's just, I just, look, crazy things happen. It's March Madness, one game. I don't know, but they are so locked in. It's very hard for me to see a world in which Bama's in the national championship game.
Well, for those of you listening on Saturday night or listening on Sunday morning, we are recording before we see the results of the rest of the Final Four, but want to get a quick thought on those two games. We have Purdue versus Tennessee. That game is at 2:20 Eastern time on CBS on Sunday. Purdue favored by 3.5. We also got the ACC battle, NC State versus Duke, an 11 seed versus a 4 seed there. That game will start after the conclusion of the Purdue-Tennessee game, scheduled right now for 5:05 Eastern time, also on CBS. Duke favored by 6.5, despite the fact that those two teams split in the regular season. I guess they split, or they only played once.
Yeah, I was going to say regular season and ACC tournament. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So, Isaac, just kind of where do you want to take it in terms of these two games? Two incredibly intriguing matchups. Not exactly the matchup we thought we'd see in particular in the South region, but so some intrigue here.
Well, Andy, first off, I think the big bummer is that a lot of people are going to fall asleep during Purdue and Tennessee because it's their like Easter Sunday afternoon nap. And
That's
so
right.
They're going to miss the only game where we have a 1 versus 2. The first time we've gotten a 1 versus 2 in a regional final since 2019, if I'm remembering our brackets correctly. And so, Andy, I am super intrigued by this game, because we know what a great defensive mind Rick Barnes is, what a great defensive team he has. What kind of scheme are they going to have to work at neutralizing Zach Edey and holding down the sophomore guards? What is it a game where Lance Jones really has to step up for Purdue? You know what? Like, there's just a lot there. And I wouldn't be surprised. Are we going to get a Lance Jones Connect matchup? Probably, as I start to think about it. So that's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, that's the most intriguing thing to me as well. Is like Lance Jones is like 6'1", Braden Smith, Fletcher, none of those guys are big. And it was a talking point coming into the Gonzaga game, because Gonzaga starts 3 bigs, Purdue starts 3 guards, and it was like, how is this going to work matchup wise? Obviously, Purdue was able to take advantage of Gonzaga's ball screen defense and do what they needed to do to win that game. But how is Purdue going to guard Dalton Connect? Like, who are they going to, like, Jones has given up a bunch of size to connect. So is Lawyer, so is Smith. I doubt they put Lawyer and Smith on him because they want those guys to be more prepared defensively. Or offensively? Is it a game where we see a ton of Mason Gillis?
That's a great point, Andy.
Because he has that size to match up with Connect.
Right.
And I think that could be or they could try Kaufman Wren on him, but I think then in that case, Connect is going to pull him away from the rim and be able to do.
And then who guards Josiah Jordan James at that
exactly
point?
Right. Then you're still having some other matchup issues as well. So as much as the obvious talking point in this game is how does Tennessee match up with Purdue's offense, I think the flip side is really intriguing. And I think Connect is a matchup problem for Purdue. And I think if he's he's very good at driving to the basket. That'll be neutralized a bit by Edey, of course, in this game. But if he's hitting threes well, like, he's going to be really tough for Purdue to defend. And I think that stands out to me as a really important part of this matchup.
All right, so we're watching that small forward matchup is critical, as well as will Santiago Vescovi play as we record right now. We're not sure. Andy, the other game, the all ACC Elite 8 matchup that we were all clearly expecting, NC State and Duke, 5:05 Eastern, as you said, Duke by 6.5. And we got a hilarious question from our guys at Locked On Wolfpack in the chat, Andy. It says, Isaac, real question. Who are Tar Heel fans pulling for in this game? I had seen somebody on Twitter ask, like, we're going to find out who Carolina folks think the real rival is by who they're cheering for. Andy, I'm curious. If you were a North Carolina Tar Heels fan, who would you be cheering for in this Elite 8 matchup?
Man, this is a really Yeah, I mean, I feel for Carolina fans. That's the best way to put it. I feel for them. This is not like to see an all ACC matchup, to see, and then you have Alabama who beat two ACC teams, including yourself, of course, as a Carolina fan, and then beat Clemson and advance. Like, you're just not looking at a lot of teams that you're feeling all that great about as a North Carolina fan right now. And I understand that. I think you probably root for NC State. I feel like you kind of have to. I think NC State is as a much more impartial fan over here. Gonzaga has a much more hateable history with Duke than they do with NC State. So I think that's where Gonzaga fans are going to lie. But DJ Burns is just a lot more fun to root for than Kyle Filipowski. Like, let's put it that way. Like, I just think this NC State team, the storyline, it's more intriguing. I kind of talked about this on a recent episode. It might have been yesterday's show, that NC State as the 11 seed making the run to the Elite Eight, potentially Final Four, is probably not as fun nationally as George Mason or VCU or Loyola Chicago, because NC State's a team that has a huge history. They're a power conference team. It's different, but this team is fun. The vibes are fun. And Duke has the same vibes they kind of always have, which is frankly not that fun. So I think NC State feels like the more fun team to root for. They're also obviously the heavy underdog in terms of seed line, which always helps.
Yeah, Andy, I think that's the right answer, because on one hand, there's the history of this thing, right? Mm-hmm. You and I have talked about it so much. NC State doing something that only UConn did. NC State trying to do something else that only UConn has done, right? With the Kemba Walker team. True, I have said this over and over and over again. DJ Burns is one top 5 favorite players for me in the nation this season, because of who he is with his size, his twinkle toes nature, his ability to score, or his ability to get 7 assists like he did on Friday night. And Andy, I think that is going to lead a lot of folks to cheer for him and NC State. Also, I think not Tar Heel folks, but also nationally, Duke is just so polarizing that you either kind of love or hate him. And so I think both Tar Heels fans and nationally, NC State is going to have the nation behind them, outside of folks in Durham, North Carolina, and wherever the Dukies fly for the winter when they're gone. And so just going to be a really interesting matchup to watch, because as you said, they split, with the more recent matchup being in NC State's tournament run. So Andy, really interested to see what happens in this game. Does NC State have the mental and physical capacity to keep going? They've shown no signs of slowing down so far. Even Diarra, who's been going through Ramadan and having to deal with not eating and getting fluid. And it's just, Andy, it's so impressive. And I, for one, am going to be cheering for a little bit of history on Sunday afternoon, excuse me.
Isaac, I'm going to give you 3 quick players who've entered the transfer portal. We're going to just go through it really quickly here. We've been teasing that we're going to talk about it. So we'll talk about them real quick, and then we'll get out of here as we get ready for those matchups on Sunday. Baba Miller entering the portal out of Florida State, per Jonathan Givony of ESPN. He's also entered the NBA draft process. Highly regarded prospect in the NBA circles, a guy who didn't have as much of an impact at Florida State as people might have hoped he would. Pop Isaacs has entered the transfer portal out of Texas Tech, averaged about 16, 3, and 3 last year. He was all Big 12 third team. That is a huge player to lose for Texas Tech, and a huge player available for everybody else. Danny Wolf from Yale, 14 and 10, all Ivy League big man for the Bulldogs, who of course had that big win over Auburn in the NCAA tournament. Wolf listed himself as do not contact in the transfer portal, which probably means somebody already has their eyes on him. We will see if we get a commitment from him soon. There's hundreds and hundreds of other players in the portal. But Isaac, we got a whole offseason in about a week and a half, and we're going to get to talk about all these transfer portal guys and how that's going to reshape college basketball next season.
Oh, baby. Once again, move the transfer portal dates. Let's go. Come on, get it right. All right, folks. That's it for today's episode, tonight's episode of Locked On College Basketball. Make sure you join us again on Sunday as we go live once these games are final. Will be great. We'll have the whole Final Four intact. We'll also do a big Final Four preview show on Monday afternoon, and then all sorts of stuff leading up to the Final Four for next Saturday. So keep it locked right here with us. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, come join us. We'd love to have you. Come for the basketball, stay for the community. It's great. If you're not subscribed, do so on audio and on YouTube. For those of you watching, just hit that button down there in the bottom corner. Super easy to do. Hit the bell so you get a notification when we go live on Sunday after the games. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until Sunday, peace.